Lil Unc back again with another reaction, man. Yeah, I see the title. Let's get to it.
The GOAT, greatest player of all time. A debate which has been percolating around various NBA hot stoves for the better part of 60 years. And generally the individual who owned
60 years is OD. Well, that's the whole GOAT conversation. I'm thinking just LeBron and Mike. This is the whole conversation with Wilt and all that. My fault, I'm bugging.
Decade, beginning in the 1960s and running all the way until today, are the players most commonly found in these top 10 conversations and GOAT debates. But who are the GOATs of each decade, and how thoroughly did they dominate their specific eras? In most cases, many if not all decades are up for some kind of debate. Was it the individual dominance of Wilt, or the leadership and winning of Russell that ruled the 1960s? And while Kareem was the greatest individual of the 70s, he hardly produced a stranglehold on the league, winning only 2 titles in that 10-year span that were separated by 9 years in between. While the 80s were a pure coin toss between Bird and Magic, and even more recent decades lacked the separation many may think. In really only one obvious case can you say a player declaratively and singularly owned an entire decade. Not surprisingly, that player was Michael Jordan, and that decade was that of the 1990s. While Jordan predictably did not distance himself from a stat accrual standpoint here, as his 15,261 total points scored during this 10-year span doesn't even rank in the top 15 all-time for highest scoring decades. In fact, it isn't even the highest total of that decade, as Karl Malone scored well over 5,000 more points than Jordan during the 90s. And during that 10-year...
Well, that I'm saying he probably did, but also Mike was going crazy in the 80s as well. You know, that's when he had those 35 a game, 37 a game seasons, you know? So, little basketball knowledge right there for y'all if y'all didn't know.
Year span, few filled up a stat sheet like the mailman, delivering per game averages of 27 points, 11 rebounds, 4 assists, 1.5 steals, and 1 block per night for this decade. Malone was named an All-Star every season of the 90s, while being named first-team All-NBA 9 times, with 1 second-team All-NBA selection sprinkled in, and adding 3 first-team defensive selections as well. Malone did all of this while missing only 3 total games during the entire decade, producing a resume that
Mouthful, y'all. I made some
place him at the very top of any GOAT list, not just the 90s. However, there was one all-important thing noticeably absent from Malone's resume during not only this decade of the 90s, but for his entire NBA career. Yes, of course, Malone failed to capture even a single NBA title during this 10-year span. And of course, the 90s ushered in the golden era of the big man, as joining Malone was Shaquille O'Neal, David Robinson, Patrick Ewing, all rising to prominence in the late 80s through 90s. All of these players to this day a fixture in NBA all-time top 50 to 75 rankings. But there was one legend right in the middle of it all that was arguably better than them all, even if he was only a dream. And while Hakeem Olajuwon's true prime ended before the decade of the 90s concluded, he produced arguably the best playoff run in NBA history, beginning with the 1993-94 season. A season where he was first-team All-NBA, first-team All-NBA defense, league MVP, and Defensive Player of the Year, while winning the championship and being named Finals MVP. The list of other players to accomplish that in one season includes no one. In the playoffs that season, he beat the 47-win Portland Trailblazers in the first round, led by Clyde Drexler. In the second round, it was the 56-win Phoenix Suns, led by Charles Barkley. And into the Western Conference Finals, it was the Stockton and Malone Utah Jazz, before beating the Patrick Ewing Knicks in the finals. Houston's second best player on this team was Otis Thorpe, who averaged 14 points per game and made 1 career All-Star appearance in his 19-year career. Simply put, this is one of the most ludicrous playoff runs ever when factoring in the competition and his supporting cast. And after the Houston Rockets would win only 47 games the following season and finish as just the 6th seed in the Western Conference playoffs, Hakeem would go full-on legend in the 1995 playoffs, beating the 60-win Stockton and two-time...
That's tough right there. I did know, because I seen a little one too. You know what I'm saying? Him showing his a little jump shot, you know. But it still surprised me every time.
6th seed in the Western Conference playoffs.
My fault,
Hakeem would go full-on legend in the 1995
They said he was crafty
playoffs,
with it too, you know.
beating the 60-win
Stockton
and two-time league MVP Karl Malone Utah Jazz in the first round. Yes, a 60-win opponent in round 1. And in the second round, it was the 59-win former league MVP Charles Barkley's Suns before getting into the Western Conference Finals and facing off with the 62-win San Antonio Spurs led by that season's league MVP David Robinson. Once Hakeem cleared these hurdles, waiting for him in the NBA Finals was future league MVP Shaquille O'Neal, and Hakeem would dominate this Magic team and Shaquille O'Neal in the NBA Finals, sweeping them 4 games to none. 4 rounds.
Yeah, Shaq said Hakeem was the only one he really couldn't get with, you know. Hakeem put him through the blender, basically. Yeah. So... no surprise.
4 league MVPs and a collective winning percentage of his 4 opponents of 73%, the highest faced by any champion in NBA history. Hakeem is one of the very greatest full-court players in basketball history, and for the decade of the 90s, he averaged 23 points, 11 rebounds, 3 assists, 3 blocks, and nearly 2 steals. And joining Hakeem were other great players and teams throughout this decade, from Charles Barkley and his Suns squads, to the aforementioned Stockton and Malone Utah Jazz, to the loaded Seattle Supersonics led by Gary Payton and Shawn Kemp that averaged 60 wins per season for 6 consecutive years in the middle of the 90s, and even that meteoric rise of the Shaquille O'Neal and Penny Hardaway.
That's one thing I like. Well, I'm not gonna say one thing because there's a bunch of things I love from the 90s that I wish was implemented into this era, just to give it a test run, see if it was would make this era better. You know, one thing is I love how many great teams there were. You know, that's something that's sort of coming back nowadays. But I want these players to stay there, you know, and build a connection with the team. You know what I'm saying? I heard somebody say that. I forgot who. So I'm sorry for not giving you your credit. You know what I'm saying? But shout out to you, whoever said that. You know what I'm saying? Because that's a fact. When teams stay, like, it's just a different vibe when you're doing it for 6 years in a row. You know? It's a different vibe. You know what I'm saying? The fans are more into it. Like, I know this guy. I've been seeing this guy play for 4 years at this point, 5 years. We going crazy. That's, it's just different. It's different, man. It's different. It makes everything better.
Away Magic in the middle portion of the decade, and none of them won shit during the 90s thanks to one player. And as great as many others were during this decade, anything they accomplished during the 90s pales in comparison to the one and only Michael Jordan. Yes, he didn't lead this decade in total points scored, but that is, of course, because Jordan played only 6 full seasons of the 10 years within this decade, retiring for...
I thought he played. I didn't even know he only played 6. But when you do the math, then yeah. When I started to do the math, then yeah. He retired in '98, for the second time, I believe. You know what I'm saying? Retired in '93. Yeah. So, yeah, that's a fact. That's a fact. If he would have, yeah, it's just if Jordan would have played like all throughout until he got to the Wizards, he probably would have had at least 40,000 points, bro. At least 40,000 points, you know, creeping up on it. You know what I mean? It's nasty.
For the entirety of the 1993-94 season and the vast majority of the 94-95 season before retiring again at the end of the 97-98 season and sitting out the last 2 years of the 90s. But during the 6 full seasons he played, Jordan led the decade in points per game at 30.3, which is over
seasons. He won all 6. Yeah,
3.5 points per game more than
I see where y'all get the 6 for 6 thing, like. whenever he played, he was there for that throughout that whole decade. It was money. You know what I'm saying? We won that. You know what I'm saying? He won that. The Bulls won that, you know? So I feel y'all on that, but yeah, bro.
Malone during this decade, while being named All-NBA First Team and First Team Defense all 6 years. So Jordan was the best player at his position on both sides of the floor for the 90s, while scoring at a substantially higher rate than anyone else, leading the league in scoring all 6 years. And of course, most importantly, he won at an absurd level as he went to 6 finals in those 6 seasons he played, winning all 6 of them. There is no conversation to be had here. No close calls or coin tosses. What Jordan did in that decade of the 90s was the most complete and thorough domination by any player in any era of basketball history, which is why to many, Jordan stands heads and shoulders above everyone else.
Watch it drop in. That's the end of this joint, y'all. You know what I'm saying? Scab just doing this thing, you know, how you usually do. Yeah, bro, it's not a debate. Like bro said, it's not a debate. In terms of the 90s, it was all Mike. It was all Mike, you know. He was dominant. He won every time he was on that court for the full seasons, you know. Every time. And it was all about him in those finals every time. Finals MVP every time, you know. So you can't argue with that. Couple of those finals, a series dropping 40. Averaging 40. Mouthful not even dropped. Averaging 40 in the finals. You know? It's just a different breed, you know? So, I feel like with that being said, we can end it off right here. And if y'all enjoyed, click on the last reaction, turn on post notifications, like the video, comment, and subscribe. And I'm out of here, man. Or I could just click the